Hi, everybody. Today's June 22nd, 2022, and I'm thrilled and honored to have with me Edward Dowd, who was a equity portfolio manager with BlackRock for years, and he's taken up the mantle of being basically a public advocate for you to help figure out what's been going on of late with some of the COVID information, misinformation, data, and analysis. That may sound like a dry topic, but it's not. I went to a lecture of his recently, and I was fascinated, and thus I invited him along. He's been very gracious to spend some time with us. So I appreciate that. And without further ado, Mr. Dowd.
Thank you for having me, Randall. It's good to be here today. Let me just set the frame. Why am I here? I'm someone who, throughout my whole career, strived to be early to investment themes, ahead of the crowd. Also, I was a contrarian at times, taking stands that were not with the crowd at all. And that's how you make a lot of money for your clients. You don't make money by being the last guy on the trend. I usually work with 20 to 30% of the information available to me, come up with an investment thesis, monitor the investment thesis. And if I'm wrong, obviously I sell the stock. And if I'm right, I keep adding to the position. So my contribution to the COVID debate is I've come out pretty strongly claiming that Pfizer committed data fraud at the clinical trials. And I am now accumulating data that shows the unfortunate results of those fraudulent actions in the adverse mortality that's showing up all over in insurance companies, the CDC data, funeral home data. Now we're seeing disability data. So just to give a quick backdrop, when the vaccine was first announced, I personally didn't want to take it, primarily because I knew it was experimental. I have a background in a lot of healthcare stocks from my Wall Street days, so I know how healthcare works and what it usually takes for a vaccine to be approved. It takes 7 to 10 years of testing. That was dispensed with. They only had animal trials and went straight to humans, so that alarmed me. And then I also didn't like Operation Warp Speed. Anything Operation Warp anything sounds like a disaster to me. Corners cut, safety protocols ignored, what have you. So when the vaccine was first introduced, I naively thought that most Americans would have this point of view, and we would not have the mass vaccination program that we did have. Unfortunately, I saw the propaganda start spreading, safe and effective. Here in Maui, in month 1 and 2 of the launch, they said it was approved over the radio. It wasn't neither approved, it was authorized under EUA. That was not made known to anybody in the Maui community. So I became shocked and horrified in the way that this was being rolled out. And then I started to get very concerned when the mandates started hitting. And all the while the vaccination program was rolling out, the VAERS data was coming in. I was hearing anecdotes from people. And statistically, I have a background in statistics. I took a couple classes, but I use statistics a lot in my analysis. And typically, if a vaccine is safe, and let's just say safe, there are adverse events in any vaccine or any medication. That's just the fact of life. The idea is to have them so low that you don't hear about them. Statistically, I shouldn't be hearing about 2 people in my friend group having adverse reactions. That statistically should not happen. That's why in most vaccines, you never hear, there's not a problem, because you don't hear them because they're so rare. This got my attention early. And as we rolled through the summer, fall, into the mandates, there were doctors who were coming out showing potential adverse side effects, and there were early studies being done. So I was very alarmed that this was being pushed. And then I'm just a person who believes in personal freedom and body sovereignty. And when I saw the mandates going on, and here on Hawaii, they had draconian mandates. You couldn't go to restaurants, you couldn't go to gyms unless you were vaccinated. So I became very involved in the anti-mandate movement here on Maui, and met Dr. Malone, who came, and through my collaboration with him and telling him early on in the fall of 2021 that I'd be monitoring insurance company reports and funeral home reports, he started to elevate my message, and that's how I got my 15 minutes of fame. And then a volunteer from Wall Street came to me, who's now been a great collaborator with me. He's an ex-insurance analyst, #1 II ranked Wall Street analyst, who, for 7 years analyzed insurance companies. And we discovered horrendous things in the insurance data. And that's where the journey began. We started looking at the insurance companies in their Q4 reports. And before the Q4 reports came out, One America inadvertently released some information that they didn't think would cause a maelstrom, but it did. The CEO of One America, in the first week of January, on a Chamber of Commerce call, let it be known that he had experienced 40% excess mortality in his book of business. That's a group life business. And 40%, he said, was a once in a 200-year flood. 10% would have been a 3 standard deviation event.
Which year was that?
That was of 2022.
2022. This is 2 years basically after what most people consider the pandemic.
Correct. So in the second half of 2021, insurance companies, not just One America, we monitored about 10 or 11 insurance companies throughout the U.S., the big ones, and they all experienced anywhere between 25 and 57% adverse mortality. We didn't get the actual body count, but we saw the dollars, and their loss ratios kind of led us to believe that's what was going on. And the group life policies are very unique. There's individual life policies and group life. Group life policies are the kind of policies you get when you join a corporation as a young person. You sign up and you onboard in HR. Your first 2 days, you're onboarding into the firm. You sign your healthcare form and which plan you want, and then you sign your death benefit, which is anywhere, depending upon your level, from $50,000 to $200,000. And you put down on that line item who you want your beneficiary to be. If you're not married, it's your parents. If you're married, it's your wife or your husband. These are things I've gotten my whole career. I never thought about them. They're kind of a freebie, and that's why it's such a good business for the life insurance companies, because working age people don't die, typically speaking. And so what the group life policies, and we analyzed group life policies throughout all these insurance companies. The individual policies are under different accounting methods and are a little more opaque. So we didn't look at individual life policies, but the group life showed alarming losses for all these companies. And they blamed 2 things. They blamed COVID, and they blamed indirect COVID, whatever that is. Okay. No one on any of their earnings calls called out the vaccine. And again, I'm an investment guy, and I do a lot of deductive reasoning. And I said, what changed in 21 versus 2020? Vaccines changed. And in 2020, going into 2021, the Q1 of 21, the insurance companies didn't see this kind of excess loss, primarily because in the first half of the pandemic, let's call it the 2-year pandemic, in year 2020, it was mostly old people that died. Okay. And then
median age was 80 to 82.
Yeah, exactly. And that did not affect the insurance company bottom lines, because those people had already paid into the system. And if they were retired from a corporation, they didn't get a death benefit. And if it was individual life, it didn't mean anything to the bottom line, because you've already paid in your whole life. And if you die at 80 rather than 82, monetarily speaking, it means nothing to an insurance company. Fast forward to second half of 2021, alarming losses, because the average age of the death in year 2 in the pandemic, there was a mix shift. It went from old in year 1 to younger aged folks, Millennial generation and Gen X. And, I'll show a chart later that shows that, and that's from the CDC data. So basically, also in the second half of 2021, disability claims started to rise for insurance companies as well. They slowly started to go up. And that also continued into the first quarter of 2022. We've been monitoring that as well. Disability is rising. And also adverse mortality continued to go up in first quarter of 2022. It came down from the horrendous, 25 to 57%. Let's call it 40% was the number we came up with. It leveled off at 20%, but that's probably because we think the mandates into the fall of 2021 pulled forward a lot of vaccine, call them hesitant individuals who had to choose between a job, a paycheck, or not getting the vaccine. Many
So I'm just going to
vaccine.
pose one question here. Could you just go back a little bit and say the 20% of what is that?
So there's a baseline of mortality that insurance companies experience, and this is why insurance is such a great business. I mean, the deaths are pretty predictable, right? Mm-hmm. So, what we used to analyze our numbers was a baseline of 2016 through 2019, or 2015 through 2019. Yep. So that was the death rate before COVID. Mm-hmm. So the 40% in the second half of 2021 was for working age people, and excess mortality above baseline. And the 20% I mentioned is excess above baseline. So we're still experiencing elevated deaths even into Q1. Makes sense to us that it would come down, and we were expecting it to come down because we felt like the mandates caused an event where a lot of people got vaccinated roughly in and around the same time because they had to. Mm-hmm. They had choices to make between getting a paycheck and not getting one.
So I don't want to stop your flow here too much, but I've been looking very recently at excess mortality data, and the United States seems to be its own case. We have far higher mortality rates, which I think comes from our testing everybody who goes into the hospital with COVID. Testing everybody who goes in the hospital, we test for coronavirus. And so I think we are labeling a lot of illnesses as deaths, although it's with COVID, not from COVID. When you compare it to the other, say, our level of economic activity, countries in Europe and whatnot, they don't have the same kind of continuation of the excess mortality through into 2021 and 2022 that we've had. Have you looked at that at all? And I'm sorry if that's a diversion.
No, I haven't. I'm just focused on the U.S. and Canada's experienced a similar pattern to us as well. The Canadian data is almost exactly the same as our data in terms of what happened to what I call the smoking gun age group, the millennials.
Okay. So with that age group, is it have you parsed the causes of death for that group? No,
they don't provide. It's just absolute death numbers. So what we did see is, if you want to pull up the chart with the graph and the 84% graph.
Is this one?
No, that's disability. We'll get back to that one.
So let me
that one.
Okay.
So this is roughly speaking the millennial age cohort, working age young Americans, ages 25 to 44. Roughly, we call them millennial age cohort. And you can see in year one what happened in the pandemic.
Sorry about that.
No worries. There was a spike, as would be expected from COVID, and potentially a rise in suicides and or drug overdoses from whatever. Mm-hmm. Then if you roll into the fall of 2021, it went to a new high. It was 84% above baseline. And what we're focused on is the rate of change. And I circled it. It's the rate of change. It's the slope of that line, which suggests there was an event that occurred that caused that to accelerate. And the people who will try to say it wasn't the vaccines will tell me, well, it's the lockdowns. Well, the lockdowns were 2020. And then they'll say, well, it was suicides. And I said, well, it's odd for that age cohort to all decide in August, September, and October to decide to commit suicide.
Yeah, it's kind of not the best. I mean, I actually think I agree with you there. I think suicide, such as it occurs, is more of a winter phenomenon.
And by the way, in this excess death number, there's going to be some deaths from COVID. There's going to be some deaths from those things. But the smoking gun for us is the rate of change for this age group, which is the healthiest of the age group compared to Gen X and then people over 65. Mm-hmm. And the number so 84% excess mortality into the fall. And that number, the number of individuals that represents is 61,000 Americans in that age cohort. And that's an alarming amount of Americans that died between March of 2021 and February of 2022. We started counting in March of 2022, 61,000 Americans. And that's a Vietnam War. Okay. And the Vietnam War was for 10 years. And this is a group that shouldn't be going to, let's pretend it's not the vaccine. At a bare minimum, you could say the health policies of our government are so bad that we went to new highs in deaths for that age cohort in year 2 of a pandemic with miracle vaccines and all the things they were doing. So they get an F. They get an F.
Yep.
Let's say the vaccines did work. It's an F. But I don't think the vaccines work. I think the vaccines are what changed and is causing a lot of this. So
fair enough. I'm going to give my one tiny minute of interjection here. I apologize again, but I do think the vaccine works, but it works for COVID-19. COVID-19 existed in 2020, and by 2021 there was COVID-20 or 21. I would never give a flu shot that is 2 or 3 years old. And that's what we've been doing. We call the COVID-19 booster a booster, when in fact it's an antiquated vaccine for the ancestral version, the pre-Greek letter one. So it was before alpha, beta, gamma, etc.
Correct.
Omicron.
Correct.
And so to do this at all at this point, first of all, to do it for children ever is an abomination in a sense, because kids don't really get sick from any of the COVIDs. 19, 20, 21, 22, A, and B, even of the old people who might have gotten some benefit from a COVID-19 vaccine, well, COVID-19 is long gone. It's just not here on the horizon anymore. And the example I perennially trot out is if you were validly scared of Alec Baldwin because he shot somebody and you didn't want him at your party because he might shoot somebody, you tell your kind of guard to watch it, give him a picture of Alec Baldwin. He's very good at finding Alec Baldwin. Stephen Baldwin shows up and he's like, you're Baldwin enough. We're not going to let you in. And maybe Billy Baldwin, he doesn't live. But by the time you have Haley Baldwin, which is what COVID-22 is, it's much, it's mutated away from the original Baldwin. Haley doesn't look or act like Alec Baldwin, and she's benign. She's harmless. Now, your original vaccine, your picture of Alec Baldwin is not going to keep Haley Baldwin out in the first place, A, and B, Haley Baldwin was not dangerous either. And so it's just an antiquated, out-of-date problem. So to keep looking for Alec Baldwin, keep boostering against Alec Baldwin when he's out of the picture and presumably at this point convicted or gone or whatever. Anyway, sorry for my interjection.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because the promise when they launched the vaccine, they said, well, because we were able to produce this so fast and we did it via, computer-generated whatever with the original variant, they promised that they could then produce new vaccines super quickly for whatever variant showed up.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't done that. And I'm just wondering, do you have any knowledge as to why they are not able to update the variants to the vaccine to the variants?
Right. Well, yes, I do have some knowledge. I mean, Pfizer tried to have an Omicron vaccine. And the issue is that vaccines take a long time. And by normal standards, it takes 5 to 7 years, and you have all these can't remember the names of the trial stages, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I guess the EUA eliminated all that, so we had the warp speed you mentioned, and they put the original one out, the COVID-19 vaccine. All well and good. In the face of a big pandemic, far more dangerous virus, I think there's reasonable assumption to make that a genuine E, the emergency part of an EUA. By the time Omicron comes along, it's kind of self-attenuated to the equivalent of a common cold.
Yes.
Maybe a little bit worse, but there's no real reason that we don't have vaccines for common colds, because they mutate so quickly. A, and B, they're not dangerous. So you don't need that. You don't need an armed guard to keep Boy Scout, Girl Scout cookie people from your house. I mean, you could, if you want no visitors to your house, you could make sure that Girl Scouts never show up. But what's the point? They're Girl Scouts. You might want to keep marauders out. So if you're Nancy Pelosi's guards, you might want to keep, people with MAGA hats away, based on political basis, or thugs or whatever. But you don't necessarily want to keep your, mild people or I don't know, puppies and squirrels. It's pointless. So it's a gradation thing. So yes, they do have the ability, obviously, to make vaccines, but to go through this whole, I don't think they could finagle, if that's a technical word, the EUA part. But it's not an emergency to have a vaccine against Omicron. So they keep trotting out, for profit's sake, my view, this kind of, they're basically trying to wring as much of it as they can out of this already used up rag of a COVID-19 vaccine by calling it a booster, and then try to get new age groups, try to get the under 15, then the under 5, and so forth. So they keep moving the goalpost, but clearly Dr. Fauci's own, he's a quadruply vaccinated with the same vaccine guy, and he winds up with Omicron anyway, shows how the vaccine has mutated away from this. And mind you, he's going to survive. He's in his 80s, he's going to survive just fine, because Omicron's not that big a deal.
Right.
So he has no immunity to Omicron, despite all his numerous vaccines, because they're from the previous versions. A, and B, it doesn't really matter. So it's kind of anyway. That's my kind of.
Well, let me just give your audience some ideas to what they wanted to happen. Pfizer and Moderna, under the color of law, were hoping that we were going to get quarterly boosters and then vaccine passports ad infinitum and do this across the globe. And you saw the global rollout of the vaccine mandates, which have subsided since then because there's been a lot of pushback. But the idea was to get quarterly boosters kind of as a thing. And the revenue opportunity for Pfizer, I did the math on it. Pre-pandemic, they were 40 billion in revenues. They're at about 90 now. If you did a quarterly booster, assume Pfizer got 50% of the global market share with 5 billion humans, that's 350 billion revenue opportunity. That
even beats Viagra, I think, which is going off patent.
Yeah, but 350 billion is a staggering amount of money. So you don't need to be a tinfoil hat person here to understand greed, power, and money. And that's what I did on Wall Street. I saw lots of frauds, and they're driven by greed, corruption, power, money, what have you. I mean, these are human traits. You don't need to speculate on some evil men in a back dark rooms, chomping on cigars, laughing maniacally, trying to, commit global genocide. You don't need that. You just need to know that, we put in place systems and momentum that carried this thing to absurdities. And unfortunately, the data is showing up that there's excess mortality in the US. There's now disability. If you want to go to that next chart, I want to talk about disability.
Yes. So that's the blue one, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is disability, and this is an interesting data set. This is a data set my Wall Street insurance analyst cohort found, mucking around government databases. This is the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics household survey. The household survey is a monthly survey. It's done every month. It also incorporates the employment number that you see that's announced every month. Mm-hmm. One of the things some of the questions they ask have to do with disability. Do you have a disabled person in your house? And a number of questions like that. That number for 5 years have been hovering around 29 million. And then since the introduction of the vaccines, it's mysteriously risen 10%, and the trend is continuing up and to the right, which also verifies what the insurance companies are seeing. So something is going on with disability. And again, I'm into deductive reasoning. My thesis is what changed the vaccine. Mm-hmm. Now, we can debate about this, but the problem I have right now is that you're not allowed to debate this or even ask the question. Mm-hmm. Censorship on this topic in the mainstream media is they won't touch me or anyone who brings this type of information forth with a 10-foot pole. And I was recently kicked off Twitter for basically just highlighting data like this. So I've been permanently banned from Twitter.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I'm hearing it's gotten worse since my banning last Monday. They're now banning people for citing Pfizer's press release with Pfizer's actual data because you can on the recent approval for children, someone highlighted that the sample size was so small as to make it a joke, and that got them banned. So you can't even cite Pfizer's own press release unless it's in glowing positive terms, I guess. So that's where we are in this debate. And so I believe it's the vaccine. I look at trends. My goal has been to get this just in the national conversation. Right now, it's only in the alternative media, it's not as widely spread as it could be. And that's the problem I have with what's going on, is that this fusion between pharma, government, and media and big tech, it's insidious, and it's suppressing a lot of truth and questions that normally would be asked. And I'm sure you're familiar with the swine flu vaccine in the 70s. I mean, there were 25 deaths and they halted the whole thing. I mean, the number of deaths we're seeing here is just, I mean, the estimates are anywhere between 150,000 to 500,000 Americans have died from the vaccine. Those are conservative.
Well, I'd like to see that kind of teased out a little bit more. I have, my difficulty with this is whether it has translated across national boundaries outside of North America. And I'm going to put a link up. Somebody from our group Panda, which is pandata.org, made a really something that should have been done by the CDC, the WHO. He has excess mortality charts from a variety of I guess first world countries, and I'll share that with you later. I'll put it in the comments section when we post this. So I'm not necessarily on board with deaths solely from, the causation of the excess mortality in the U.S. solely from vaccine.
No, it's not, but it's definitely the smoking gun for me was when the mix shift from old to young in 2021. And it's not all deaths of despair. And the insurance company group life results are not deaths of despair.
So let me play devil's advocate for you. Could it be that the dry tinder of the oldsters burned up in 2020, so they weren't around, so that they can't, I guess unlike James Bond, I mean, you can't die twice, and so they're not going to be part of that equation anymore. So it's going to be, a broader spread. Let's say the virus itself is so dangerous that it's starting to hunt out. Are you going to notice, bigger gradations as people get out and about more, and they're going to be different age groups? I still don't think it was so much the young, but the lesser old. I mean, what do you say to the dry tinder disappearance theory?
Group life would have experienced some losses in Q1 and Q2 of 2021. If they didn't, they would have seen the deaths, and the young people should have died the same year the old people died, but they didn't show up in the financial results. And then in the CDC data, you can see the clear shift from old to young. And to say that a virus that is getting less virulent as it mutates has decided to hunt the young doesn't make any epidemiology sense to me. I'm not a doctor, but Dr. Harvey Reich would agree with me if I said that to him. It didn't decide to hunt the young in the second half of 21.
Got it.
Now we can debate. I'm all for debating, what's going on with the young folks, but we're not allowed to debate that.
Well, that's an excellent point. Have you had other curtailments on the public square? I mean, the quasi-public square, Twitter, has LinkedIn followed suit, or other places? I mean, have you? No. Have you been? Where do you get your message out? How do you do it? And what are your plans?
So on LinkedIn, I don't post because I use that as a way of communicating with people. So as long as I don't post, they won't touch me unless they decide to come at me because of my public persona, which would be interesting because I would not have violated any of their terms of service. I'm on Getter at Edward Dowd, DOWD, one word, Edward Dowd, and people are imploring me to start writing a Substack, which I think I might do, but I haven't started that yet, and also put up a website. I haven't done that yet, but I was mostly getting the message out on Twitter, podcasts, Steve Bannon's War Room, and other alternative media messages. And what's great about my data is when we first came out with the CDC all-cause mortality data in March, other actuaries reproduced our data. So we're not, making charts up. This was reproduced by other actuaries. Now, granted, they were anonymous and not as brave as myself and my cohort, but they came on and they analyzed it.
Well, first of all, I want to applaud you as far as that goes. There's the I think it's qui custodiat, the custodian. My Latin's imperfect, but basically, who watches the watchers? Who guards the guards? And in medicine, who watches the medicine? If the doctors are kind of fudging the medicine, who watches that? And so I've had other people on the show. I think you met John Bodoin, and I think it's really crucial as a citizen to be out there speaking and I think you have validity to what you're saying. I'm not sure it's true 100% across the board, every inference, but that's,
no, it doesn't have. It doesn't have.
It doesn't have to be. But
yeah,
to your point, it's a matter of debate. And usually, if the answer to your question is "shut up," usually that's not, that person oftentimes does not. Ad hominem attacks and ex hominem, getting rid of the person, and not just at the person, but to remove the person, just generally doesn't show the strength of one's argument. I think it was
correct.
Carl Sandburg who said, if you have the law on your side, argue the law. If you have the facts, argue the facts. If you have neither, just yell and scream. And that tends to be a lot of the argumentation we get in opposition. If people don't agree with what you're saying, I still think it's so important to have the genuine facts out.
Well, and here's the thing. I've seen a lot of frauds, and I know how frauds work. And it dawned on me when the FDA came out and said they wanted to hide the data for 75 years from the Pfizer clinical trial. That's when I said, aha, this is like the great financial crisis where the ratings agencies basically ratified bonds that should never have gotten AAA ratings because they were making too much money. The FDA said mysteriously, because most drug trials, as you know, come up with reams of data. They're stored in a warehouse, and then they're electronically stored as well. No one ever asked for the data because people just trust the FDA. Well, some doctors, after the vaccine started to become controversial, asked for the data through a FOIA request. And that's when they said, oh, you can't see it for 75 years. So being the person who's seen lots of frauds, I said, now I get it. The FDA is in on this. And a lot of the doctors who are well-meaning, who are not, how do I say, like statistical experts at looking at clinical data, ran with it because that's what they've been taught to do. And I don't blame them. That's what a lot of analysts on Wall Street did with these AAA rated bonds. Well, S&P and Fitch and Moody's all said these are AAA rated. Gee, they're probably good. Well, they weren't good. And that's kind of, I think, the FDA through what we call the institutional imperative. And that's where an institution over time becomes corrupted through just insidious incentives over time, where they act on behalf of their own benefit rather than the stakeholders, or in the case of a company, shareholder.
Yeah,
and Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger talk about this.
Fair enough. I think there's a reverb loop. We'll call it the politico pharmacological industrial complex. This standard cronyism, where in this case the politicians are able to kind of make a rent-seeking arrangement with the pharmaceutical companies, a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing. Now, the pharmaceutical companies, they're all over the airwaves right now. They have a lot of money. They're kind of whirlwinding, they're tornadoing their product, and a lot of the money that they get from it goes back to politicians. Lather, rinse, repeat, and it just becomes a kind of a crescendo kind of item. But I'd like to be cognizant of your time constraints, because I know you might have a hard break. So if we have, say, 15 or 20 minutes more, I'd be happy to go further, but I'd like you to make best use of your time and get across your message further.
Yeah, sure. A lot of people are hesitant to view this material because they would think that that if there was harm going on, that we should have been alerted about this a long time ago. But you spoke to something that's interesting. It's this reverberation. And once momentum picks up, like this momentum, Operation Warp Speed, fast approval, lots of money, and then mistakes are made. And so, I'm of the belief there's been a lot of disability and adverse mortality. If I'm correct, a lot of people are now culpable for this. And so that's why it hasn't stopped. It's so big that it involves too many institutions. It involves the Biden administration for mandating. It involves, and Trump did not, Trump doesn't get off either. They're all involved in this. Trump's head of the FDA left to go to a venture fund that its number one position was Moderna. Okay. And Scott Gottlieb, who's on the board of directors of Pfizer, he was a former FDA commissioner. So this revolving door policy in government from private to public for big paydays. And part of I think this institutional imperative is, you kind of wink, nod, and look the other way to get a sweet job somewhere in a corner office making several $1 million a year for basically doing nothing. I think that's been going on for a long time. The media companies, unfortunately, we learned in, I think, February or March of this year, through a FOIA request, received actual over $1 billion of money from the government to promote the vaccines in 2021. And that's on top of what they received from the pharmaceutical ad spend that was running through their coffers. So you can see that the momentum of this and this catastrophic mistake that's probably been made, you don't have to assume, some tinfoil hat thing. This is just how frauds work. I've seen it before. Money and power go to people's heads, and they just run with it. So this is something that it's not hard to believe. It's not hard to think that it's happened. The question that we all have is, why hasn't it stopped? And as we roll through time, and mandates are still, for the most part, in the military. Government employees still have mandates, and a lot of corporations have mandates. This is going to be, I think, potentially a ginormous lawsuit for many, many institutions.
Yeah.
I think Pfizer eventually gets sued into oblivion. Moderna is a one-product stock pony. That's going to go bankrupt. So this is going to be with us for years to come, and it's a disaster. And my goal in coming out and speaking about it is to, at least give people cover to talk about what's going on, and then investigations. And then I would like to see a halt to the vaccination program personally, because in my estimation, in my analysis, it's the biggest medical disaster in our lifetimes. But we can debate that, but that's my thesis.
So, people, cynics might query whether you are making your own kind of counterplay, being in the portfolio, world and so forth. Do you have financial thoughts about this? Or are you, kind of recusing yourself? How do you approach that kind of aspect?
Yeah. So when I first went public on this, I made a point to not take any short positions in Pfizer or Moderna, because I knew I would hopefully create news and create awareness. And I didn't want to come anywhere near conflicts of interest. This is a public service. I'm doing it because I think I'm right. If other people want to make money off this and my thesis, go at it. I've had some hedge fund friends make bets on this. I'm not going to make any money on this because my message is too important for someone to criticize me or the government to come after me for security laws violations. I'm just not going to go there.
Right.
The other thing I want to get across on this broadcast today is, it's not just creating data sets and having a thesis. My insurance cohort and I, he wrote a letter to 100 CEOs of life insurance companies and to 50 state insurance regulators. And we held a series of calls in March with some doctors on the other side of the debate to inform the insurance companies that they may be the victim of fraud or vaccine-induced losses. We, of the 100 or 200 and so odd people we invited, we had about 25 people show up. And out of that, we have a working group of 5 individuals who are working behind the scenes to make this topic at least talked about in the insurance industry. It's still not being talked about. And I can tell you why. A lot of these CEOs mandated jabs for their own employees. They implicitly trust all these institutions like the FDA and the CDC. And I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on right now. But I'll tell you this, there are some insurance companies who are starting to realize it. They're not going public about it. They're making sure their own balance sheets are shored up first before they go public, is my guess. I have no proof of that. And so we've taken this letter and we've presented it to some senators in Washington saying, we put the insurance industry on notice. And some senators may ask the insurance industry, hey, I heard you've received this information. All the charts that I've discussed, including way more, and a thorough analysis done by my cohort, was presented to these insurance companies. Senators hopefully will ask questions. Hey, I heard you've seen this data. What are you doing about it? What have you learned? Is there any merit to this? So we're going to just keep elevating this topic until either I'm proven wrong or they pull the damn vaccine. And I don't care if I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong, but I don't think I am, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I was mentioning earlier that I had a similar experience, not quite on the same scale, but with ZIKA. So I wrote an article about 3 years ago on ZIKA microcephaly and its disappearance. It was the previous pandemic. And at the time, I didn't know there was a next pandemic. It was pre-COVID. And I was wondering what happened to this thing. And the more I dug, the more I kind of found cotton candy, stuff that looked real, but kind of dissolved on the, least bit of scrutiny or moisture or whatever. And I put this out. I put an article out into all the medical journals and regular, Nature, Science, New York Times, all sorts of stuff. There goes my dog. I think that's maybe commentary or the mailman. Anyway, I apologize. So, but there was a lot of feedback. I wound up having a hearing in early 2020 with the 2 erstwhile chief editors of JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the top 2 medical journals in the country, if not the world. And they were on a Zoom call with me, and this is by then early 2020. And they saw merit in my article, and they said, "Listen, we're not going to back up what you're saying per se, but it could be a commentary piece." And I said, "Well, that's awesome, because this would be like great to be in that top journal." They said,
Right.
but this is like at the time when COVID was becoming a thing. We don't want to sow any doubt in the public health establishment. We feel as if putting your article out might do that. Like, well, but that's okay though. I mean, sowing doubt. Everyone should have doubt about everything. You don't want to just drink Kool-Aid. I mean, Jim Jones says this is Kool-Aid. This is one of you should have doubt from authority figures, because sometimes it's real Kool-Aid and sometimes it's Jonestown. I mean, you have to be able to see what's going on and be able to grade those things. Anyway, I kind of lost my train of thought because of the dog, but this kind of like figuring out the narrative in advance and figuring out what things people should be believing, so forth. Maybe you can kind of help me fill in my train of thought from where you last left off. I apologize.
Well, narratives. I mean, they had a narrative that they didn't want to disrupt, and your research was problematic. And that was probably interesting for you at the time. And you probably thought about that often, that why was a narrative so important to them? And I have a theory about it that I've been talking a lot in the financial circles to people, especially wealthier folks, that COVID, forget whether it was planned or not planned. We don't need to go there. That's just that's a tinfoil hat cadre of a waste of time. But those of us in the financial community have been watching and waiting for a global debt collapse to occur and an ushering in of a new monetary system, because we know that nothing really changed from the great financial crisis in 2008, 2009. It's just been papered over. And the debt explosion to keep a lot of economies going at a very subpar level for the last 12 years has occurred. It's all been done with debt. And what I found very interesting early on was on April 5th of 2020, a Federal Reserve President, James Bullard, got on Face the Nation and was asked the question, how are we going to restart the economy? People will be too scared to go out. Well, he said, it's interesting you say that. We have a lot of great new technologies, and we can test and give people immunity badges and know when people are sick or not sick. Ooh. April 5th of 2020, a Federal Reserve President. Then they were going to discuss on the next segment the surveillance technology that could implement that. Okay, so I believe that COVID has been used as an excuse, and then the Fed was in the economy, the global economy was in trouble in the fall of 2019. We all knew it, and they needed an excuse to print money, and COVID gave them perfect cover. They printed 65% more monetary supply than the previous year, and it was the largest single money printing event in the history of the Fed. That kept us afloat for 2 years, and here we are again, seeing global markets start to unhinge. Today, Sri Lanka just declared that it's bankrupt. So I've been very vocal that a global debt collapse will start with one country going kaput, and it'll cascade. And so COVID is a convenient excuse. We don't need to go with it, but it's perfect cover for a global debt collapse, because you can usher in, under the guise of medical safety, travel restrictions, passports, vaccine passports.
So in this case, cui bono, who benefits from such?
The central bankers benefit because they have cover to print money. The politicians benefit.
Why do they benefit from printing money? I mean, what do they get out of that?
Well, they get out of it. They get to keep their jobs and their control. Politicians, this whole global debt crisis it lays at the feet of central bankers and politicians. When the system implodes, and it will, they do not want to take the blame. Wouldn't it be nice to blame it on a virus that dismantled the global economy instead? That to me makes more sense than anything else, because there's no way a Federal Reserve President should have been saying that on April 5th. There's no way that the global coordination between all the Western nations in terms of the vaccine rollout. I've never seen global governments be in unison on any one thing. After the virus started to become less virulent.
Well, I agree with you to a point. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy guy, but through Andrew Klavan, I've heard the term conspiracy of interest. And I've actually Googled this term, and I included it in my book, Overturning ZIKA. That's a plug. Go buy the book. It's on Amazon. Not you, but everybody who's listening. I think I like the book. I wrote it. I'm biased. But a conspiracy of interest is when something happens and then other people get along. It's not that they all knew in advance that this would cause this. But once the thing is there are people who attract to it, kind of like a magnet. And a magnet will attract certain types of metals, but not others. And things will kind of go around it. In the case of ZIKA, ZIKA kind of took off. It was leaked prematurely and became a panic and all that, fine. But in Brazil, which has very restrictive abortion constraints, there was the left kind of glommed onto ZIKA or used it as a banner to overturn abortion laws. And so they went to the Supreme Court in Brazil, and they wanted legislation, blah, 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 and everything had to be an emergency. And so it became a huge upswelling of political, legal, and the left, the Labor Party, and so forth, all kind of rallied around. Did not want ZIKA to go away because it served as a useful pathway towards other types of change, as it were. And so that becomes a conspiracy of interest. It's not as if necessarily China, for instance, knew that by having coronavirus in a lab that XY they would take over the world. But a lot of things happen after the fact, and then people kind of trail around, and they, a lot of politics is a team sport, and your team's doing this, you do this. So the same people who are on the one hand saying our bodies ourselves, we have a bodily autonomy, we have to get to decide an abortion. When it comes to vaccines, it's like your body, our choice. My body, my choice for abortion, birth control, but your body, my choice for vaccine. So the things don't necessarily need to make coherent sense. It's where everything happens to be politically. Your group is moving along in one way or another.
Well, it's interesting you say conspiracy of interest. Europe is effectively bankrupt. They have a pension system. We have the social security system and 401ks. They're not going to be able to. My thesis is the social contract has been broken. No one knows that yet. They're not going to be able to pay all these pensions and these benefits over time. And Europe is broke. And before COVID, you probably may or may not have been aware of the Yellow Jacket protests in France. They were going on for weeks and weeks. Yes. Weeks and weeks and weeks. There was social unrest all over Europe that really wasn't.
It's kind of an elite. It's a working class elite kind of thing.
Yeah, and it wasn't really all that well broadcast here in the U.S. You ask, I mean, you're educated, I'm educated. But if I talk to any of my other friends that don't pay attention to the news, they didn't know it happened. Mm-hmm. And COVID comes in. Guess what? You can't protest because there's a virus, and they shut the Yellow Jacket protest just disappeared. And I believe a lot of the vaccine passports and mandates that went on in Europe were so draconian. They were there as cover for social unrest. Now, do you think maybe our Federal Reserve and our politicians might want to use that too if it gets kind of squirrely here, which it looks like it's increasingly getting more squirrely? Mm-hmm. And I would like to be wrong, but I've made a prediction. We're going to see another pandemic. Biden's even advertised that as of yesterday. I think we'll see another one, and it doesn't need to be, it could be anything they want, and then they'll shut things down to prevent protests, what have you. Now, I would like to be wrong. That's one prediction I want to be dead wrong on. But if it happens,
you're not going to be shocked either.
I'm not going to be shocked, and more importantly, don't be in fear. If this is cover, and don't get all worried about whatever the virus du jour is or whatever it is, you'll be fine. Take good care of your health. Don't freak out. Don't be in fear, and don't take experimental vaccines that haven't been vetted yet. I mean,
yeah, I think, at my congregation, religious congregation, we've had this debate. Frankly, every single one of my social groups, they all went through various forms of undoing. I belong to a tennis and racket club, a squash and tennis club, a second tennis club, an angel group, and a religious congregation, a couple other things. And each one of them, we went through this kind of political schism, and it's still going on. People. My point with the religious one is that at this point, mind you, there's really nothing going on. The Omicron is Haley Baldwin, as I mentioned. It's right. Not Alec Baldwin anymore. And people are still want to have mask mandates within certain part of the services and all this kind of stuff. And, I said, look, at the edges, we're so close to, first of all, I think it's clear. I'm always, first of all, except when I'm around my wife, I'm always right. And, and to begin with, but they don't know that. But I said, look, right or wrong, courage is a virtue. Being courageous, it's a better look than fear. And I forget who it was who said, there are worse things than death. There's living with the loss. My son had the quote, and I'll have to come up with it. I think it's John Locke, but it's basically there are things worse than death per se. It's living without your soul, without the strength of your convictions, without being able to live according to the way you desire. And so I think people have lost sight of a fair amount of that. And it's not to say we should all go down, in a vat of anthrax or Ebola, being right. There's reasonable caution, but for most of these things, I'll just leave you perhaps with my image of Meatloaf body surfing in the crowd. So this is one example I came up with, probably one of my psychotic episodes, but basically, these singers body surf. So if Ariana Grande, who weighs maybe 75, 80, 90 pounds, whatever, if she gets out singing, she body surfs, the crowd has no trouble transmitting her from person to person to person. This is a cold virus, and so it gets transmitted nobody really suffers from this. She gets back on the stage and she could do it again. And her sister could come out and do the same thing. Meatloaf gets out there. He's Ebola or anthrax or whatever, and he tries to body surf. He leaves a huge crater. And so people might suffer, they might die, but everyone else steps away. There's a human reaction to any kind of biologic threat, which is we are not merely just Legos. We're not stable, static. We have reactions. So in one form or another, we have our own kind of not just personal immune system, but our social immune system that reacts to something severe. The reason Ebola, every time they mention Ebola, everyone goes, oh my God, there's going to be an Ebola pandemic. It never happens because it burns too hot, burns too bright. It's Meatloaf crowd surfing.
Right.
So, and so I think people need to temper their fears of the next thing, if it's monkeypox or whatever. These type of things, so they're really horrible. They either it's going to, HIV is kind of a different category in a way, but even that, people have self-attenuated, away from the transmission once they figure that out. Anyway, so I'm curious. We have just a couple minutes left. I'm trying to fit us in under an hour. Did you want to show that last slide and any closing remarks?
Yeah, this is something you and I talked about over the last, or in the first half of this interview. It's the
is this
CDC
the right one?
Data.
Is this the correct one?
Yep. It's the CDC data, and this went out to the insurance companies. We posed them two questions. Why was there a pickup in adverse mortality in the second half of 21? Why was there a shift from old to young? And that again, that impacted their bottom line. The first part of the pandemic did not, and you can see clearly here in red the young people in 21, and then the old people in 20, the mix shift. You can see the mix shift. And there was an increase, a mix shift from old to young. And that showed up in the insurance company results. And another thing I didn't really touch on that's interesting is funeral home. The funeral home industry is 80% private. 20% of it is public. So there's some publicly traded stocks. I analyzed those stocks. Their revenues and earnings accelerated into the second half of 21. In 2020, they had a little spike up, but then they cratered going into 2021, primarily because everyone thought that, they got some one-time results and it would go, that would be the end. Pull forward some deaths and then bad business for a while, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that didn't happen in the second half of 21. And the biggest one of them, SCI, Service Corp of America, or Service Corp International, is still floating around near all-time highs and looks like a growth stock. I
got to interrupt with a joke. The funeral director says, "How are things going?" He says, "Oh, business is dying. It couldn't be better."
Yeah, exactly. And on one of their calls, one of the CFO of one of these companies made a comment saying, "Yeah, we expected in Q1 of 2022." We expected business to trail off considerably as we normalize. Unfortunately, our results exceeded even our expectations, and he said we can't claim, even when you back out the COVID deaths, which I guess they did, but they didn't give us the number. Even when you back out COVID, these results even surprised us, which means more deaths, which is good for them. So these are just. Again, I use the mosaic analyst theory, deductive reasoning. I just have lots of data sets. I got VAERS, I got the Department of Defense leak, I got insurance companies.
Right. So I'm going to cut you off because I'd like people to be able to follow you, and I'd like to end within an hour because that is a better for Twitter and so forth. They like this under an hour. So you have a place where people can find out what you're writing or saying?
Yep. Permanently banned from Twitter last Monday. Now I'm on Getter at Edward Dowd, one word, and the last name spelled D-O-W-D, at Edward Dowd on Getter.
Fair enough. So easy enough. So I am in your debt for coming on, and I appreciate it, and I'd love to continue the conversation. I'm sure you're going to have other venues to speak about rather than just measly, little old me. But I look forward to being able to share this with others around. And if you're watching this and you enjoyed it, please let us know and give us feedback. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you, Edward. Have a good day.
Thank you.